The date is June 27, 1965. The location is the Los Padres National Forest in California. It is a place of ancient silence, a rugged landscape of dry brush, towering pines, and hidden creeks. But on this particular afternoon, the silence is broken not by the wind, but by a roar that sounds like the end of the world. A fire has started. It isn't just a campfire gone wrong. It is an explosion of heat that consumes acre after acre within minutes. The ground is parched, desperate for water, and the flames move with a terrifying speed, climbing the canyons, devouring the trees, and turning the blue California sky into a choking blanket of black smoke. When the Forestry Service trucks finally scream up the winding dirt roads, pushing through the heat and the haze, they are looking for a disaster. They expect to find panic. They expect to find campers fleeing for their lives. But when they reach the epicenter of the blaze, near the Sespe Creek, they find something, or rather someone, that defies all logic. There, amidst the chaos of a 508-acre inferno, lies a man. He isn't running. He isn't fighting the fire. He is lying on the ground, seemingly half asleep, dazed and detached from reality. He looks like a ghost, gaunt and skeletal, dressed in dark clothes that are now covered in ash. The Rangers don't know it yet, but they haven't just stumbled upon an arsonist. They have found the most famous voice in America. They have found the Man in Black, Johnny Cash. And he isn't just watching a forest burn, he is watching the climax of his own self-destruction. This is the story of how one man's demons set a mountain on fire. The context: a man on the edge. To understand why the forest burned, we have to understand the man holding the match. By the summer of 1965, Johnny Cash was a titan of the music industry. He was the voice of the downtrodden, the rebel, the outlaw. But privately, the outlaw was being held hostage by his own addictions. This was the peak of his amphetamine years. Cash was living life at a breakneck speed, fueled by a diet of pills, uppers to stay awake for tours, downers to sleep, and alcohol to numb the spaces in between. He was skeletal, barely weighing anything, his eyes sunken and wild. His behavior had become erratic, paranoid, and dangerous. He was a man running from himself, and on this trip, he decided to run into the wilderness. He called his nephew, Damon Fielder, and told him to pack up. They were going fishing. Cash wanted solitude. He wanted to escape the lights, the fans, and the noise of his own life. He packed his gear into his camper truck, a vehicle he had affectionately named Jesse. Now, Jesse is a crucial character in this story. It wasn't a pristine, reliable vehicle. It was a rugged, beaten-up camper that Cash loved, but like Cash, it was falling apart. It leaked oil, it rattled. It was a mechanical disaster waiting to happen. But Cash insisted on taking it deep into the backcountry, far from paved roads and civilization. As they drove deeper into the Los Padres National Forest, the heat was rising. The grass was tall and yellow, dried out by the California sun. It was the kind of terrain where one spark could spell catastrophe. Most people would be cautious, but Johnny Cash wasn't most people, and in his chemical haze, caution was the furthest thing from his mind. The incident: a mechanical betrayal. They found a spot near the creek. It was beautiful, secluded, and perfect for fishing. But the peace didn't last long. According to the accounts that followed, and Cash's own later retelling, the trouble started with the truck. Cash wanted to move Jesse to a better spot. He fired up the engine. The truck roared to life, shaking and sputtering. As he drove through the tall, dry grass, something mechanical failed. Cash claimed it was a wheel bearing that had gone bad. The friction caused intense heat. The bearing cracked or leaked, dripping boiling hot oil directly on the wheel hub. In the dry tinder of the forest floor, that hot oil acted like napalm. Sparks flew from the exhaust and the wheels. Within seconds, the grass beneath the truck caught fire. It wasn't a slow burn, it was an immediate flare-up. The flames licked at the tires and quickly spread to the surrounding brush. At this moment, a sober mind would have panicked. A sober mind would have grabbed a shovel, a blanket, water from the creek, anything to smother the flames before they grew. But Cash's reaction was strange. He later said he tried to bat the fire out, but it moved too fast. However, reports from the time suggest a man who was slow to react, hindered by the drugs in his system. His nephew, Damon, saw the danger instantly. He realized that this wasn't a small brush fire, this was going to take the whole mountain. He took off running, heading for the nearest ranger station miles away to get help. Cash stayed behind. The Klinghanger, fishing in the apocalypse. The fire grew exponentially. It climbed the ancient trees, turning pines into torches. The heat was so intense it could melt glass. The smoke billowed up, visible from miles, alerting the entire county that something terrible was happening in the national forest. And there was Johnny Cash. As the fire raged around him, consuming the landscape he had come to enjoy, he didn't flee. When the rescue teams finally arrived, fighting their way through the wall of heat, they found him by the water. Some legends say he was calmly fishing while the forest burned behind him. Others say he was passed out, overcome by the drugs and the smoke. Regardless of the details, the image is striking. The man in black, alone in an apocalypse of his own making, indifferent to the destruction. But the fire was doing more than just burning wood. High above the flames, in the rocky cliffs of the Sespe Pondor Sanctuary, a tragedy was unfolding. Johnny Cash hadn't just set a forest fire, he had set fire to the home of one of the rarest animals on Earth. He was about to face the federal government, a furious public, and a courtroom battle that would become legendary. And his defense? He was about to blame the truck. When the smoke finally cleared days later, the scale of the destruction was laid bare. 508 acres of pristine national forest had been turned to charcoal. 3 separate mountains had been scorched. But the Forestry Service was concerned with something far more precious than timber. This specific area was the sanctuary of the California condor. In 1965, these weren't just birds. They were ghosts. They were critically endangered, hanging on to existence by a thread. These massive vultures with their 9-foot wingspans were prehistoric relics. At the time of the fire, it was estimated that only 53 California condors remained in the entire world. The fire that Johnny Cash started ripped directly through their nesting grounds. The heat and smoke drove the birds from their nests. Eggs that were incubating were likely cooked or abandoned. Adult birds fled the area in panic. Of the 53 birds in existence, 49 were driven away from their habitat that day. The local population was decimated. The government officials were livid. This wasn't just negligence, it was an ecological crime. They decided to make an example of the country star. The United States government sued Johnny Cash. It was a landmark case, the first time in history that the federal government had sued an individual for starting a forest fire. The courtroom drama, defiance personified. The legal proceedings that followed were surreal. Cash was dragged into depositions and court hearings. You might expect a man in his position to be apologetic, to be humble, perhaps to blame it on a freak accident and ask for forgiveness. But this was Johnny Cash in 1965. He was angry, he was high, and he was completely done with authority figures telling him what to do. During the deposition, the prosecutor pressed him hard. He asked Cash point blank, "Did you start this fire?" Cash looked at the lawyer, his face stone cold, and delivered a line that sounds like it came from a movie script, but it was real life. He said, "I didn't do it. My truck did, and it's dead, so you can't question it." He refused to take personal responsibility. He anthropomorphized the vehicle, treating Jesse, the camper, as a separate entity that had committed the crime and then conveniently died in the flames. It was absurd, it was arrogant, and it was pure Johnny Cash. The infamous quote. The prosecutor, frustrated by this lack of remorse, tried to shame Cash. He brought up the condors. He explained the gravity of the situation, that Cash had nearly wiped out an entire species from the face of the planet. He asked if Cash understood the loss of the majestic California condors. Cash didn't blink. He didn't look down in shame. He famously replied, "I don't give a damn about your yellow buzzards." It was a shocking moment. To Cash, in that state of mind, the birds were just buzzards, and the government was just another force trying to cage him. He felt persecuted, so he lashed out at everything: the law, the nature, the birds. Of course, the judge was not amused by the dead truck defense or the disregard for endangered species. The verdict was swift. Johnny Cash was found liable. He was ordered to pay $82,001. That $1 at the end is significant. It wasn't a round number. It was a precise calculation of the water, the manpower, and the damage. In today's money, that fine would be well over $500,000. Cash wrote a check, but the story didn't end there. Johnny Cash eventually paid the money, but he never really apologized. In his autobiography years later, he recounted the story not with shame, but with a strange sense of ownership. He was the man who fought the forest and lost, but lived to tell the tale. The California condors miraculously did not go extinct. Through massive conservation efforts in the decades that followed, efforts that had nothing to do with Cash, their populations slowly recovered. Today, hundreds of them fly over the canyons of California again. But the scar on the mountain remained for a long time. The story of the fire became part of the Johnny Cash mythology. It was the ultimate proof of his outlaw status. He was a man so volatile, so dangerous to be around, that even the mountains weren't safe. So, when you hear that deep baritone voice singing about shooting a man in Reno just to watch him die, or falling into a burning ring of fire, remember, it wasn't just a persona. The fire was real, the danger was real, and for one hot summer day in 1965, Johnny Cash was the most destructive force of nature in California. This is the story of the fire, the bird, and the man in black.